Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, February 24th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Coming up, who owns the land that's farmed in the San Joaquin Valley? Or better yet, what percent of those farmland profits actually benefit the valley?
So what this story kind of found out is that under the Williamson Act, we're giving these tax write-offs to the biggest farmers that are arguably producing some of the biggest exacerbations of overproduction.
We dive into a controversial farm tax break later in the show, but first, these headlines. Protests are planned today in California against proposed federal cuts to Medicaid and Medi-Cal. Republicans in Congress are pushing proposals that could sharply cut funding to the government healthcare insurance. A statewide group called We Are California is focusing its protests primarily on 3 Republican House districts. That includes the House districts of Darrell Issa in San Diego, Young Kim in Anaheim, and David Valadao in Bakersfield. Cuts to Medicare are estimated to impact more than 80 million Americans who depend on it. Basketball players on the Fresno State men's team are under investigation for alleged sports betting. At least 3 players are under review and were not allowed to play this weekend, according to new reporting from the Fresno Bee. The Bulldogs were going up against the Air Force on Saturday. Betting on games or giving information to sports betting groups is prohibited by the NCAA. Fresno State officials told the Bee they were reviewing the matter and cooperating with the investigation. At least 1 player has been removed from the team roster. Since 2016, teams of hurricane hunters with the U.S. Air Force Reserve have flown over the Pacific Ocean to gather data on approaching atmospheric river storms. Cap Radio's Manola Cicada visited a team flying out of Sacramento County's Mather Airport.
On these trips, a team will drop a device called a dropsonde from the aircraft that collects data from the surrounding atmosphere and sends it back to them. The information from these flights can help improve experts' ability to understand and predict atmospheric river storms. Major Anthony Swindle is an Air Force Reserve hurricane hunter navigator. He says Mather Airport in Sacramento County is a good spot for the team to fly out of because of its location.
It's the closest to the atmospheric rivers we can get from the West Coast. And so we'll take off out of here, fly out over the Pacific for anywhere from 7 to 8 hours to sample those systems before they make landfall.
Data collected by his team is sent to a division of the National Weather Service, which then shares it with researchers. Swindle says the data can be used to forecast where an active storm will make landfall.
And so that's going to help, especially for atmospheric river, determining the amount of rainfall that the West Coast is going to get for levee management and reservoir management.
The team will be flying out of Sacramento to do this work until March 6th. In Sacramento, I'm Manola Cicada.
The Fresno County GOP was recently split over who its leader was. The questions followed elections last month where 2 people declared themselves chairperson. But the California Republican Party has officially confirmed one of them. Liz Kolstad will continue leading the Republican group. Kolstad had faced a challenge from Peter Halajian, a fellow member who'd also declared himself the group's leader. The state GOP's decision puts an end to the dispute. A former Kern County supervisor who is under investigation for alleged child abuse has been given a restraining order. Zach Scrivener formerly represented Kern County's District 2. According to news reports, he has agreed to stay away from his ex-wife and 4 children for 3 years. The order comes after Scrivener was formally charged earlier this month with 5 felony counts that included alleged child abuse. Last spring, Scrivener was stabbed in a dispute at his home, which authorities later alleged was over sexual abuse.
Join KVPR for an event with NPR senior White House correspondent Tamara Keith, Wednesday, February 26th at Fresno City College. Get an inside perspective on covering the White House for NPR at this in-person event. Tamara Keith grew up in Hanford before going on to cover world events and presidents for audiences nationwide. Seating is limited. RSVP for this free event online at kvpr.org/events.
And now to our main story. Fresno County, like much of the San Joaquin Valley, is known for its agricultural farmland. There are farming operations of all sizes, from small family farms to multi-thousand-acre company operations. But it doesn't just stop there. Even foreign investors have bought up land in recent years. And many of these agricultural landowners benefit from something called the Williamson Act. The act dates back to the 1960s. It was designed to preserve California's quality farmland amid urban sprawl. Essentially, property tax assessments for agricultural landowners are much lower than the full market value. Farm owners also receive a subsidy from the government. Since it was created, the Williamson Act has not been without controversy. That's according to a new investigation by our news partner, Fresno Land. Fresno Land is also a partner of the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. Their reporting shows that tax breaks under the Williamson Act are disproportionately benefiting a select number of megafarms. The investigation uses never-released data that shows less than 1% of recipients are receiving half of the program's $5 billion. Fresno Land's Gregory Weaver is the author of that two-part series, and he joined me in the KVPR studios to discuss his investigation. He starts out by giving us more background on the Williamson Act.
The Williamson Act is a farming program that's been around since the late 1960s. And a simple description of it is that there's about 1.4 million acres of farmland that is enrolled in this program. And farmers who have land that's enrolled in the program get a different property tax assessment than they would normally get. And typically the Department of Conservation, the State Department of Conservation, who administers the program, says that the tax reduction that farmers get encourages farmland preservation.
Okay, so is this a statewide thing, and your report focused specifically on Fresno County, though?
Yes.
Okay.
We have the second most land enrolled in the Williamson Act, and of course, it's some of the most valuable farmland in the world, certainly in the state. And so it's a good case study to see how such a large slice of land, functions.
Yeah, you write, and I'll quote you here, the Williamson Act exposes how a program designed to preserve family farms has instead subsidized their demise. I would love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, right now, something that you'll see in nearly any farming story out of the San Joaquin Valley is that a lot of farmers are facing issues on crop prices, that there's a ton of production going on right now, and the market is so crowded that it's really driven down prices. So what this story kind of found out is that under the Williamson Act, we're giving these tax write-offs to the biggest farmers that are arguably producing some of the biggest exacerbations of overproduction. They come in with these huge purchase prices that are only justified under more intensive farming production that has new record yields, and thus further crowds out the market and makes it harder for small farmers to operate on their much smaller yields. This is something that the Farm Bureau brought up to us, is that this is a huge issue for small farmers right now. And so we found that roughly 120 entities out of roughly 4,000 farmers who are enrolled in the program, only 120 take home the majority of the tax subsidy under the Williamson Act. It's important to note that this isn't explainable either just by saying that, the top 120 are just simply bigger, and so they're going to get a bigger subsidy. Even on a per acre basis, these top 120 entities are subsidized at a rate that's 3 times higher per acre than the smaller farmers in Fresno County.
So the argument being there's a concern that could crowd out smaller farmers or family farms who can't compete with that production.
Yeah, basically the bigger farmers have an extra advantage of the Williamson Act. They get a even bigger tax write-off due to how the tax rules work under the program that small farmers don't get.
And you had called the Williamson Act a, quote, tax dollar drain. You write that it siphons hundreds of millions of dollars away from schools, healthcare, vital public services. Elaborate on that conclusion as well, please.
Yeah, it's a simple matter of looking at the tax rolls. The Williamson Act every year wipes away roughly $5 billion of taxable wealth that, when it is taxed, would go towards schools, healthcare, and all sorts of things that, the county general fund funds. And so this tax write-off, this of $5 billion a year, is taking away money that could be going to schools and healthcare and whatnot.
because of the kind of special circumstances that the Williamson Act creates.
Yep.
Paul Dictos, Fresno County's tax assessor, is a large figure in your piece. Tell us more about Paul and his position.
Yeah, Paul's kind of an outsider to, I think, a lot of the politics in Fresno that have for so long kind of made the Williamson Act this kind of unquestioned farmland program. He's from Greece. He moved here in the 1960s, and he became an accountant here. And right around the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008, the county was facing a lot of funding issues. Of course, housing prices fell 15%. The city was cutting costs, the county was cutting costs, and they were looking for new ways to find revenue. And Paul runs as this outsider to become the tax assessor for the county. And he wins in 2010, 2011. And once he comes on board, again, the county's facing these funding issues. So he starts looking for ways to increase revenues. And one thing that came quickly apparent to him is that there were issues with how the Williamson Act was running. I mean, essentially, he found out that a lot of the basic tax records that are responsible for making sure that farmers are accurately taxed was years and years out of date. And there were people who shouldn't have been in the program. And so once he felt that the voters are being shortchanged here, that, all this money from that could be going to schools was actually going back to people who, even under the letter of the program, probably shouldn't be getting it. Once he found that angle, he's kind of been this loud figure on, what is the Williamson Act doing and who's it truly benefiting?
We've heard what the critics think. I want to pivot to maybe some proponents, because I could see an argument being made that agriculture is an enormous industry here in the Valley. You mentioned it's the most valuable land in probably parts of the world. It employs thousands of people. Have people said, hey, why shouldn't agriculture get this benefit from this subsidy? It's contributing so much to our economy in other ways.
Yeah, I think there's two ways of digesting your question. The first one is that we found out that the Williamson Act recipients that are getting the biggest tax break are the ones that are actually the most unstable operations. So we brought up the Wawona old Schmidt Camp operations. They got something like $1 million in tax breaks after they were bought up by a private equity firm who cut costs, ran the business into the ground. They declared bankruptcy, and 10,000 people lost their jobs. The second one is the Assemi family. They got the biggest tax break under the Williamson Act. Their farming operation is having major financial difficulties, and whether or not Maricopa Orchards, which operates out on the west side, what is its future? What do those jobs look like? That is all in severe limbo. And so we talked to a farming expert, the Canada Chair of Agricultural Research, Jennifer Clapp, and she studies farming sustainability worldwide and has documented the issues that involve the sort of farmland consolidation that we found the Williamson Act is ultimately providing the primary benefits towards. And she spoke on pretty solid ground that the people who are buying up farmland and the sort of huge markets that they're trying to compete in really is unstable for jobs, for funding, for the environment. And so the Farm Bureau told us essentially that these are hard times for farmers and that they need any farming subsidy that they could get. And so the other part about your question that I would go into is that even under that measure, the Williamson Act makes no sense. It's providing tax breaks to the people who are exacerbating overproduction the most, the people who are driving down prices even further that make it harder for small farmers to operate on their much smaller yields. And so we asked the Farm Bureau about these questions, and they didn't give us any answers to this. They just, they gave us a pretty standard response to all it.
That was my conversation with Fresno Land reporter Gregory Weaver. You can read Gregory's two-part series on the Williamson Act on our website at kvpr.org. And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.